Hi everybody, this is Gavin at Abode Based Real Estate, and the topic for today's video is what contract protections are in place for buyers during a standard purchase and sale agreement. So I'm going to run through a handful of the primary contingencies that are involved in a purchase and sale agreement, and I'm going to talk about a few of the lesser known contingencies or protections that are in place as well. And the reason why I want to talk about these is because as a seller, you may want to know what are the situations where a buyer is able to walk away from this contract and get their earnest money back, or what are the potential hiccups that could occur during this process. As a buyer, you want to know, well, what protections are in place to ensure that we're able to inspect the property, that we're able to get our financing in place, that we're able to ensure that this is the kind of property that we actually want to buy. And so this is both beneficial for sellers' knowledge as well as the buyers. So in terms of the major contingencies that are in place, the first that comes to mind is the financing contingency. And what that is simply a contingency that says the buyer has to obtain a loan to purchase this property, and the kind of loan that they're looking to pursue is a FHA loan or a conventional loan. The buyer plans on putting this amount of money down as a down payment, and the buyer is asking, for $5,000 in closing costs be paid by the seller for the buyer. And that contingency allows the buyer to walk away from the agreement if, say, they lose their job and they're no longer able to get bank financing. In that case, the earnest money is refunded to the buyer and everybody parts ways as friends. Now, part of that contingency is an appraisal protection for the buyer. So if they're under contract for $300,000 and the appraisal comes in at $275,000, it then outlines a specific set of options that are available to the buyer, namely reduction in purchase price, renegotiation, coming to some kind of a middle ground, or bringing more money to the table. The next is the title contingency. And what this basically says, there's two forms of it, one in the standard purchase and sale, then an additional form. But essentially what it does is it says the seller has to be able to provide a marketable title to the buyer, right? The seller has to be able to sell the house that they're trying to sell. And in addition to that, if anything comes up in the preliminary title commitment, say there's some kind of utility easement that runs through the back of the property, meanwhile the buyer wanted to put in a swimming pool and now can't because there's a gas line back there, it allows them to walk away because the title comes encumbered with these issues, this easement for utilities, and that's preventing the buyer from doing what they want to do with the property. So title contingency is very important. Next, and perhaps the most common reason why buyers walk away from a purchase and sale agreement or walk away from purchasing a home is because of the inspection contingency. And what this does is it gives the buyer a certain number of days, generally 10, but sometimes shorter, to completely inspect anything and everything about the property. Look in the crawl space and look in the attic, inspect the sewer line, check out the electrical, the plumbing, all the various cosmetics, related to the home. And the buyer doesn't necessarily have to find something wrong to walk away due to the financing contingency. They can simply have a change of heart and change their mind. They can decide that they don't want a blue house anymore. And that can be tough for a seller to swallow, but the inspection contingency is in place to give the buyer a review period to ensure that, yep, this is the house that they actually want to purchase. Now, if during the inspection the buyer finds certain things that aren't acceptable to them at that particular price point for this particular home, then the buyer and seller can negotiate on repairs, price reduction, closing costs paid, and everything in between. Now, there's also some lesser known protections in place for buyers during this process. Number one is what's called an information verification period. It's the first 10 days after mutual acceptance, and what it is a period of time where the buyer and buyer's agent, the selling agent, can ensure that what was disclosed to them in the listing is actually true. It's a 4-bedroom listing. It actually has 4 bedrooms in the house. It says it's 2,500 square feet. Let's make sure it's actually 2,500 square feet. It's in this school district. Let's make sure it's actually in that school district. If anything that was disclosed that's material turns out to not be correct, then the buyer has the ability to walk away and get their earnest money back. Now, kind of related to that is the Form 17, which is the seller disclosure statement. It's a long document. It's 6 pages long. The Form 17 outlines everything the seller knows about the property while they were living there. And it's things like, are the toilets hooked up to the sewer system? Does the property provide them adequate year-round water supply? Are there any HOAs, and what are the fees? Did they do any remodeling while they lived in the home? Was it ever a meth lab? All of these kinds of questions are in the Form 17, and the buyer has a review period of that Form 17 as well. There's also 2 lesser used contingencies. They're called either an HOA review or a neighborhood review contingency. And basically what those are is if you're unsure about the area, or if you're unsure as the buyer about the HOA, you can establish a contingency to ensure that the neighborhood, that the HOA are going to be acceptable to you. That you can keep your boat there, that you're allowed to build a shop if you're wanting to build a shop, right? Whatever it is. So there you have it. Those are some of the major and minor contingencies involved in a purchase and sale agreement. If you have any questions, talk with your agent to ensure that the appropriate protections are put in place for you to feel comfortable making an offer, or as a seller accepting an offer. Feel free to reach out, and we'll talk to you soon.